Well, a very good morning to everyone from me, your host, Alicia Jali. Welcome to yet another exciting edition of your favorite program, Media Monitor, your program where we give in-depth analysis of the day's news and events that got the country as well as the region talking. Now, as usual, we are going to be discussing today's headlines. But first, let's take a look at our topics for today. 20 EFF parliamentary members have been suspended along with their leader, Julius Malema. Is the ANC really in trouble? To shed some light on this, we will be joined by ANC Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Jessie Duarte, and political analyst Professor Sipho. Seepe, are we going to be in the dark this festive season? Eskom has started rolling out more blackouts, and of course, did the grand jury verdict spark racial outrage in Ferguson, Missouri? The latest reports are indicating that riots continued on Friday after some calm. In other news now that are making headlines, internationally hopes were dashed for the Korki family when it was reported that Pierre Korki was not among the 8 hostages that were freed in Yemen. A scramble by pharmaceutical companies to find the elusive cure for Ebola could provide positive results sooner than expected, but scientists caution that it will be months before it can be used. The Health Professions Council of South Africa tribunal hearing the case against cardiologist Dr. Vote Passon continues. And remember, our call-in topic for today: has the 2014 Parliament fulfilled its mandate following the uproar we have witnessed throughout the year? Do share your views concerning this topic by calling us on the following numbers. It's +2711 714 6843, 714 6847, and 714 6857. Or do interact with us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor, as well as on Facebook Media Monitor, including our email address, of course, mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Very good morning to you. Let's welcome our guest this morning. We welcome Mr. Rulani Baloyi, SABC Radio News Editor, and Mr. Vuyo Mvoko, SABC Contributing Editor. Panel, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much. Now, panel, let's take a look at our video wall and just take a look at all the stories that have been making headlines in today's news headlines. Let's start with the Sunday Independent, of course. The Sunday Independent is leading with Nkandla Builder arrested. Let's also take a look at the Sunday Times before we go further into the review of those stories. Let's take a look at the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times is leading with SA's fat cats, SA top 3 mine bosses, of course, that are raking in more millions. Of course, we're going to look at that as well. Let's look at City Press now. City Press is headlining there with, of course, Senzo knew his killers. And of course, another Sunday Tribune, also the same story there. Nkandla Builder arrested, Ms. Thandeganene back in the news. Now, panel, let's start with, of course, the Sunday Independent. A very big story. Durban-based business tycoon Ms. Thandeganene has reportedly been arrested and released on 50,000 rands bail under being accused of charges ranging from fraud to corruption. Let's start with you, Rulani. What do you make of the story?
This story, when you look at it, is very, very exciting. But when you read in the paper, you realize that whatever she's been arrested for, it's got nothing to do with the Nkandla construction. And it's got everything to do with all the other things that she's been accused of, like faking tax certificates and also faking her qualifications as far as construction in the construction industry is concerned. But the reason why she's a very interesting person to the public is because she won a 90 million rand tender to be involved in the Nkandla construction, and we hear that she's been occasionally paying money into someone who works for public works. And of course, when the case goes on to trial, we'll be able to know who is this person. Is it one of the 12 people who are now on DC in the KZN Public Works Department? So she's a very she's a person of interest in that regard, but her arrest has got nothing to do with Nkandla as it stands.
Well, I mean, it's that said, I mean, Brian, excuse me, is correct, but the fact that she is, I mean, there's all these allegations, you know, against her, makes it even more worrying, because it then means that if these things were to be true, then such a person to be for such a person to be entrusted with the kind of responsibility doesn't make life easy on the Nkandla matter at all. It's been a sore point for so many people. It has had a ripple effect politically, and for someone like this now to be, I mean, for a person who was involved to now be accused of these kinds of allegations makes it sexier, but also worrying.
Well, definitely. Are we going to see more developments in the story as this week comes, as she is going to be looked into about the fact that she actually worked on the Nkandla project?
I think the problem now is that it goes back to the tender processes in the Public Works Department. How good were they? Was she really vetted before she got the tender? Because remember, before you get a tender, they look at your tech standing, they look at your qualifications and all of those. It goes back to question, remember what the previous Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, spoke about the introduction of the Chief Procurement Officer, which has already been introduced. And the role of this office, of the Chief Procurement Office, is to make sure that big tenders are really, people are involved, have to be checked to ensure that they really qualify and they are beyond questionable standards. So this person, Ms. Nene, there's a lot of things that are going to now be looked into. And very soon, we would not be surprised as if there are some links to the Nkandla issues that maybe she also overpriced. We don't know what's going to come out, but it's going to be very interesting.
Apparently she earned 90 million for that tender at Nkandla. Let's now move on and look at the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times says, SA's fat cats. While this story is basically about South Africa's top 3 mine bosses, namely Glassenberg, Mr. Motsepe and Desasco, packing in millions despite, the strikes at Marikana and so forth. Vuyo, what are your views about the story?
It's good that something like this is happening the way it's happening, because the issue of inequalities, has been a very big issue, but which hardly gets addressed because sort of people tend to brush it aside. But it's a very real issue. There you have all these companies saying they cannot afford, to pay workers a living wage. Yet, if you look at how one person and of course your CEOs and all CFOs and all those people under them, and then it's cause for concern. This cannot continue because this is a recipe for disaster. Because there's no way workers can be happy if they see these kinds of figures that are being tossed around.
It says that Desasco's salary is 443 times the 12,500 rand that the miners were asking for.
And on what basis? No matter how brilliant you may be, what justifies giving someone that kind of a salary? It's actually sick.
Because you see, it looks like in our country, the economy, or maybe the bosses, the owners of big business, they're more interested in profits more than poverty alleviation. Because, if you are an ordinary mine worker, now is the festive season, chances are people, you expected when you go home, your family is expecting a lot from you. But you find that the CEO of ShopRite, who's taking over about close to 50 million rand a year, and we, as the consumers, we expected to go and shop. The prices keep on going higher and higher. And as the prices goes higher and we buy, he gets more money into his pocket. It shows how unequal our society as a country is. And which is, to a certain extent, why some quarters of our country have been calling for nationalization of some of these assets. Because the CEOs, remember Chris Griffith, the CEO of Anglo-American Platinum, when the workers were on strike, and he was at first unapologetic about his bonuses and the salaries that they are earning. To a certain extent, it doesn't make sense. I've never really, we've never worked in big boardrooms. What is it exactly that they do that makes them to deserve a 40 million rand bonus or whatever these amounts that they are? But you also look at how much people like Patrice Motsepe are worth. We're talking billions of rands.
Let's leave it there, Rulani. We can go on and on, with the figures. And unfortunately, we've run out of time on that segment. And when we return, we're going to analyze the coverage of the chaos that occurred in Parliament. Do stay with us. This is Media Monitor.
into Africa. This is Chad. The president is Idriss Déby. Chad got independent from France on 11 August in 1961. The population is more than 11 million people. One of the major languages spoken is Arabic. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back. ANC Deputy Chief Whip Doris Lagude condemned the behavior displayed in Parliament in recent months. This comes after the Powers and Privileges Committee suspended 20 EFF members without salary. Let's take a look at this insert compiled by Sibusisiwe Tongo.
The Economic Freedom Fighters will pull all stops to hold Parliament, suspending 12 of its MPs, whom among them is their leader Julius Malema. This comes after the National Assembly voted in favor of the Powers and Privileges Committee report, which imposes suspension without pay on the 12 EFF members.
Honorable Ndlozi and Honorable Malema be suspended for a period of 30 days without remuneration in terms of Section 12(5)(g) of the Act.
Some of the opposition parties condemned bad behavior in Parliament.
NFP is appalled at the way Parliament has quickly degenerated to a kind of a circus.
The EFF, you are wrong. You cannot act like that in Parliament.
As Arang say that the laws of this House must be respected.
We are confident that it will go a long way in terms of discouraging anarchy, rowdiness, as well as the disruption that they have characterized Parliament.
All right, now, panel. The recent chaos in Parliament has been hailed as a change in our democracy. But is this really active democracy, or are we really witnessing the end of our democratic era? Let's start with you, Vuyo.
Look, it really depends from what vantage point one comes. If you ask the EFF, they'll tell you that it's their mandate to make the ANC uncomfortable, and over a million people who voted for it want it to behave the way it does. For most of us, it's of course not quite what we would like to see in Parliament. We want vibrancy. We want everyone to be put on their toes, to be vigilant, and more importantly, to do the right thing for the sake of South Africa. But I'm not sure at a personal level whether what we are seeing in Parliament is actually contributing to that. I don't think they are winners in what we are seeing, and I don't think that the stature of Parliament is being done any favors. I think we need to look at ourselves, all of us, and really if there's a need to actually even change the rules or to tighten the rules, I think that's what needs to happen, because at the end of the day, it's all drama, but really it's not profitable for SA Inc.
Roland?
I think, Professor Benturuk, just after when it was the end of the fourth Parliament, he said that he was retiring and he was taking time off and just to take a good rest. And I remember during one of radio interviews that he had, he said, I don't think I'm ready to be in Parliament when the EFF comes in. And as someone who's been in Parliament for 20 years, he already knew that the presence of the EFF would actually bring a lot of difference. But as South Africa, we must remember that even the previous parliaments that we've had, the previous 4 parliaments we've had, they were not necessarily smooth sailing. People were given sanctions. Remember when Tony Leon was called a chihuahua by Johnny Dilange of the ANC, and he called him a bullfrog. People have always said things to each other and sanctions were meted out. But for me, what really surprised me is that it was one of those things. What happened on Thursday for the EFF is like, oh, fine, you're punishing us, but we will continue to do more. And it doesn't take anything anywhere, because remember, the issue of punishment or sanctions or whatever decisions are made is it's a way of correcting the situation. But the EFF has promised that on the 12th of February, when the State of the Nation is delivered by the President, they will be there. And if he hasn't answered questions about when he's paying back the money, they will make sure he doesn't speak to the nation if he can't give them certain answers. So it's really not taking us anywhere. And it looks like maybe the process that Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa had started, if it had been allowed to continue, maybe we could now be speaking of a different outcome. But as things are, the EFF is unapologetic. Parliament has taken the decision, and let's see what happens when Parliament resumes.
All right, Rulana, I actually want to expand on that point that you've just mentioned there. Cyril Ramaphosa bargaining with the opposition parties on some sort of peace deal that we all know went wrong the very following day. Do you think this was a strategic move on the president's stance, Vuyo?
Well, I'm sure, I'm hoping that when the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC is here, you will ask the question, because there are fingers being pointed at the ANC that if anyone is responsible for the collapse of that deal, it is in fact the ANC. I just think that the ANC should have been a lot more magnanimous and tried and at least should have done everything in their power to actually salvage that deal. I think that would have said a lot more positive things about the party and its intention, that irrespective of whether they think everyone else is wrong, but for the sake, I think, of the country and for the chaos that we've been seeing over the past few months, to have been seen to have really tried or done everything in its power to actually take leadership on this particular issue. I think that that would have brought more kudos for the ANC.
I'm just thinking, Vuyo, when you're saying that you know, people always speak about being the bigger person. What if the chairpersons of the House would decide, if people say things that they've been saying, they just ignore them? Would that bring peace? You know, if someone stand up and say, like that EFF Honorable Mashabela stood up and called the president a thief, you ignore them. It's unparliamentary. But you decide, for the sake of peace, let's pretend they didn't say anything. I'm just thinking, what would happen in that regard when the EFF leader, Julius Malema, says the ANC government killed people in Marikana, and you just decide, let's just ignore them. I wonder what difference that would make.
But there is a concern in South Africa that opposition parties are actually bent on undermining the parliamentary decisions by running to the courts at every opportunity, Vuyo.
Well, that's a consequence of not being able to resolve those matters there. I mean, our constitution is clear. We're clear about the separation of powers, that the legislature should do its work, the executive should do its work, you know, and the judiciary should do its work. The minute you start blurring the lines, it's a recipe for disaster. Again, in my view, it calls for leadership at all levels. People should be a lot more mature than they are being at the moment, and I think they need to take very hard and tough decisions. And one of the most important things that I think needs to be done is to take a step or two back and actually look at whether, even if you are convinced that, you know, history will be on your side tomorrow, but take a deep, hard look at yourself and say, have I done the best that was expected of me? I mean, the ANC, as it keeps on telling us, that it's a leader of society and it stands for all good things of this world, should look and say, even though we are convinced everybody else is wrong, but is what we have done or what we are doing the best we could do.
But also you must remember that the other thing with the reason why the opposition parties keep running to the courts is because they are a minority. I mean, look at the voting on Thursday, voting on the Powers and Privileges Committee report. It was 210 yes for suspension, 111 no, and only three abstentions. So automatically majority rules. If the ANC is still in power everywhere in the country, there's no way that any decision is going to go against what they're saying, because then the political parties have no choice. Like now the EFF saying that now that they've received the formal letters of suspension, they are taking the parliament to court. So if you have a country where the majority part or the ruling party still has 60% or more of the votes, this is what we're going to continue experiencing, because if you watch the parliament proceedings, it doesn't matter what the smaller parties say. The ANC is in charge, and they will always have more than 200 votes,
all right,
and the other parties will always have less than.
Thank you so much. Let me take Mfano Kona from KZN. Mfano Kona, a very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Your comments, please. Siyaphila Putwam, please go ahead.
Yebo. Ngithi uphawula kancane lapha ngale issue yase parliament eyenziwa amalunga eFF umsasazi.
Yebo bhuti.
Cha thina iFF isungulwe ngohlaka labantu abasha ngikhomenta ngoba ngumuntu omusha. iFF ngibona eSouth Africa isambarayisa njengabantu abasha abangasiyo abangenayo ingqondo abangafisi ukuthi iSouth Africa iye phambili. Isenzo sabo ngibona sebegida kanye nabantu bobandlululo. Kushuthi manje lokho ayekusho uJulius Malema akasabe as if elathina abantu abasha usayilwela yena imfuno zakhe. So ingakho ngithi mina iFF asisayiboni thina isimele abantu abasha njengoba ithe yona isungule ukuthi imele abantu abasha. So iyasambalana eSouth Africa. So ngibona ngathi into ayenzayo nje ayikho right.
Siyabonga kakhulu bhuti wami umfana futhi from Durban. Well, he's basically saying that the EFF that they're seeing now is no longer the EFF that they voted for to represent all their needs. In a nutshell, what do you make of those views, Vuyo?
Well, I think an important point to make is that in a democracy, you shouldn't and cannot, allow people to get what they didn't get via the back door, what they didn't get through the ballot. Because there was a democratic process, people voted in big numbers for the ANC, and that should be respected. Now, obviously, it would seem that the EFF feels that by doing more of what they have been doing, they will get the votes. Well, let's see what the next election.
Let's see what some of the tweets are saying.
Will really bring us.
All right. Well, let's take a look at some of the tweets that have been sent regarding this topic. Mazwai Voklega, EFF does ask important questions, but my problem is when they talk at the same time, and that always leads to a chaos. Thank you so much, Mazwai. Siabonga Seme says, why the DA did not walk out with the EFF if they are serious about fighting corruption. Hypocrites. Thank you so much for those tweets. All right, we have another caller on the line. Caller, a very good morning to you. Please go ahead with your comment. Please tell us your name first.
Mashifane Peter Siabusa.
Mashifane, please go ahead, sir. A very good morning to you.
Yeah, I find the discussion very one-sided.
Please tell us why, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, because the opposition parties even condemn the sanction that was imposed on EFF. But now you are only concerned about the behavior of the EFF to say the opposition parties were concerned about the behavior. They were also concerned about the sanction to say the sanction was not corrective, it was not rehabilitative, but it was punitive, biased, unjust. You see. But now your arguments are just saying opposition, they condemn the behavior.
Thank you so much for that point, Mashifane. He says, well, some of the views today have been biased. Well, thank you very much for your view there to set the record straight. We're going to take a very quick ad break. And after the break, it's our 2-on-1 segment with ANC Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte and political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe. You don't want to miss this. This is Media Monitor. Stay with us.
You can't have a gut feeling about other people's gut feeling.
Ngaba has continued the tradition of passing stories onto the next generation using a platform that offers stories to a far more greater audience.
Zombie no go unless you tell them to go.
This is what the audiences all over the world knew Fela Kuti for.
Join Musam Khalifi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT.
over 20 years now, South Africa has just been one big construction site, building houses.
This is the only country in the world that provides free housing. The government has done very well in this particular area.
What are the challenges facing human settlements?
Most of the people who move into urban centers are looking for jobs, basically, and that increases the pressure in that particular area. We know exactly what needs to be done where and how it should be done.
They were also building houses for married staff, and you had the married quarters and the hostels. And all of that stopped. What happened?
Nothing has stopped, Mr. Mateza. We cannot solve the housing problems on our own in this country. We cannot wait for government as well.
It's a joint venture, if I were to put it like that, between the public sector and the private sector, particularly in the area of mines.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, during the ANC's consultative conference earlier this week, President Jacob Zuma emphasized that the African National Congress is in trouble and its youth league is facing the same issues. Let's take a look at this clip first.
The youth league has been shaken, but also the mother body has been shaken. It has its own weaknesses. It needs to look at itself, and we were saying so in the NEC a few days ago. We admit that the organization is in trouble.
Now, to give us more insight on this, we have ANC Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Jessie Duarte, and of course, Professor Sipho Seepe. Gentlemen and lady, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Deputy, let's start with you today. Now, the president's recent speech received a lot of different remarks from the public. What do you make of his speech?
Well, we thought it was a very good speech, an accurate speech. It received unanimous applause from the people it was aimed at, because I think in the ANC we analyze things before we say things. And prior to the speech, the president had the benefit of having been briefed by all the regional chairs and secretaries of the Youth League. He had the benefit of meeting all the regional chairs and secretaries of the ANC with regards to the Youth League. And I think the context within which he was speaking was, we slid down in the last general election by a couple of points. We're concerned. We're concerned about why we are having a slide down. But moreover, we're worried about the influence of money in the rank and file of our membership. And one of the key issues is the idea that people can take a bag full of cash to a region and say, I'll pay for your regional conference and it's going to go in this particular direction. And I want to say to you that our membership and regions responded quite positively to say, we're not going to allow this. We'd rather not have a conference than go in the direction that big business or big capital interests want us to go to, or the interests of a minority of people who have a particular agenda which is not the National Democratic Revolution's agenda. And I think we've had a week of extreme debate, extreme discussions amongst ourselves, and we stand by the statement made by the President. It's a correct statement. It's a statement also that says we've got to self-correct tendencies within the ANC that promote single individuals to a level where a faction and a divisive faction is created, which is what we saw happening to our Youth League.
Now, Professor, with that in mind, do you think that people were very quick to misinterpret the president's speech?
As always, whenever the president speaks, there's always a variety of interpretations, but by and large, it's always read incorrectly. The ANC may have its internal problems, but there's no gainsaying the fact that when it comes to its dominance politically, it remains dominant. Remember, it was not so long ago that we had the general elections. And during that period, or period leading to that, there was this negative output from the media to an extent that when the ANC won, one of the ministers, Gigaba, said, we beat the opposition, but we also beat the media.
Yes.
But what you're talking about here is a party that, after 20 years, with all the mistakes, still gets 62%. But what it means that it's able to exploit its social capital, its historical capital, and its political capital, that it still is able to connect. And one of the things that it does best is that instead of focusing on the media, they go back to the people. And the people always reward. They simply say, we're not going to be dictated by people who are saying, this is the kind of ANC and leadership that we want. And only this week, and I don't see the media making a song and dance of it. You have an ANC, you have had by-elections. Out of 31 ward elections, the ANC won 26. So that indicates the political dominance. But the president is correct in a sense of, for me, where the ANC failed to set the agenda, that just after elections, you should be riding on the crest of the wave. You should be setting the agenda. But we see its inability to reverse that level of negativity that we saw before elections and after elections. Before elections, people said, Nkandla, the e-tolls and all that are going to determine. And the ANC said, no, we want to talk to our people. And the people responded in a way that they did. I would have expected that the very same issues that made the people to vote for the ANC would have put that on the table. And we can talk about my sense of what they should have actually done, which they have not done.
We'll definitely expand more into that, Professor. Now, Deputy, everybody wants to know, with all the recent developments and, of course, the big NUMSA split, where does it leave the Tripartite Alliance?
The Tripartite Alliance is very strong. Let me say that the exclusion of and decision by one union won't crack the alliance. We're very confident of that. The fact of the matter is also that amongst all the trade unions that are affiliated to COSATU, it's not hegemonous that they all support the NUMSA position. They have different views on certain issues. They have views about the General Secretary, which I think now might have passed. They have other views about the correctness of the debate around the National Democratic Revolution and the NDA. We're not naive. We believe that when we engage COSATU, we have to engage them on the issues that actually affect workers every single day. And the aspirations of the working class in this country is very important for the ANC. So we're not about to put our head under any sand. Again, direct contact has been our approach. The ANC has been intervening. The CEC of COSATU has asked us to continue with our intervention, and they've added the former leaders of COSATU on board. We believe that COSATU is a formidable strength trade union movement. And we believe that its members will decide which direction it should take. Not the ANC, not a single union. It doesn't work like that. The membership of COSATU will make that decision. Whatever that decision is, we will support.
Wow, you heard it here first. Professor, I've got your back. The recent party turmoil, the economic challenges that the country is currently facing. What debate should South Africans be starting at this point?
Well, I think the debate was put in by festive. We have the NDP, which is a blueprint, which all parties except the EFF have actually supported. And of course, NUMSA and the COSATU, they've got reservations around it. What I would have thought is that we would have talked about it, because we have identified as a country that we have a challenge with poverty, unemployment and inequality, and also corruption. And I would have thought that the best amongst us will also say, here's the blueprint, how do we take it forward? For instance, the ANC has come up with at least a concept called radical economic transformation. What does that mean? And there's been an attempt to explain it. I mean, Rob Davies, the minister in government, had said there are three elements that it should have. One is the radical economic transformation of the structures of the economy, where you go beyond simply extraction to where you beneficiate and all that. And he says there's also the issue of dealing with production relations. And there's the issue of making sure that the growth pattern is a job-rich growth pattern. And I would have thought that we would actually be talking about that. But because those are not easy topics, how do you turn around the economy? It's quite a difficult challenge. So what we do, we go for the easiest. find a scapegoat for all our problems, and all the energy is expended on that rather than coming up with solutions. There's issue of energy, there's issue of skills, there's issue of infrastructure. How are we going to bring young people into that space? How are we going to make sure that the business invest in the economy? How are we going to make sure that there are better labor relations in our midst? Those are some of the challenges that we should be talking about. But because they don't lend themselves to easy answers, we avoid them.
All right, look, before we go further, Deputy, then let's take a look at some of the tweets that have been sent to us by some of our viewers. Henrietta Mongalo says, Jessie, are you going to be they came, they ate, they destroyed, ANC pillars collapsing, and even government parley disintegrating? All right, you're going to answer that very quickly, Deputy. Johan Rousseau says, why don't the ANC-led government respond to public outcry of 87% on TV on funeral legislation matters? Deputy.
Well, on the issue of they came, they ate, they destroyed, I seriously must disagree. We are as concerned as any other South African is about corruption. Corruption doesn't belong to the ANC, it belongs to our entire society. One of the things I find quite awkward, and frankly speaking, let me put it this way, the people who corrupt people are people with money. They never get criticized. They're actually lauded and raised above everyone else's heads. They're celebrated. They're given awards. They're loved. They go and they actually do all this corruption and corrupt other people. Now, I think it's great that finally some chickens are coming to roost on the Nkandla matter. And I think that's a very good sign that our society will not tolerate people who tell lies about themselves and actually make money out of lies. On the question of why doesn't I don't understand the public 87% on TV on funeral.
On a TV funeral, that was, I think, in relation to the Senzo Meyiwa, the state funerals for the fallen stars. But Deputy, let's ask this before you go.
I can answer that.
Let's really get into this before you go. Now, the EFF has vowed to disrupt the State of the Nation address when it opens in February. What is the ruling party going to do about this?
Well, let me say this. We see that many journalists are very excited when the EFF breaks and disrupts a parliament that has been put together very carefully. And the call is for the ANC to be magnanimous and to rise above chaos. You see, parliament is sovereign unto itself. Our constitution is very clear. When you commit yourself to be a member of parliament, you commit yourself by oath to respect the parliament, and the oath that you take says so. So it's quite clear to us that we're not dealing with people in the form of the EFF as parliamentarians who actually understand why they're there. What we will do about it as the ANC, look, I want to be very clear and say this. The ANC will mobilize its membership to defend the parliament if we have to. Outside of the parliament, wherever we need to do, the whole of Cape Town, we'll do so. But you know, how does that take us forward? What we must do is get the EFF and the EFS friends in Parliament, COPE, the DA and others, who have now become part of a coalition of very strange parliamentarians, to understand that when you disrupt Parliament, you're actually stalling the fabric that makes our society turn around. And so I equally give all of the opposition the same amount of responsibility, because they enjoy the antics of the EFF. And the journalists of our country seem to love the EFF to bits. We seem to have, the media seems to love this chaos. So what you're promoting is, you're promoting chaos. We're not going to promote chaos. That is why we support the expulsion of the EFF members from Parliament, and that is just simply applying the rules of a sovereign institution in our country. If you can't respect it, if you can't respect the rules, why are you there? You heard the young man from KwaZulu-Natal say, they don't represent what we elected them to do. When a political party gets into that space, they need to do some introspection. My advice to the EFF, and I know they will insult me as they normally do, I'm open to that. Go and have a workshop and look at your behavior.
Thank you so much, Deputy and Professor. That was, of course, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Ms. Jessie Duarte, and, of course, Professor Sipho Seepe. Thank you so much for your time. When Media Monitor returns, we're going to analyze the coverage of load shedding during the festive season. Will it dampen the mood and the ongoing protests in Ferguson? Stay with us. This is Media Monitor.
to Africa. This is Senegal. The president is Mr. Macky Sall. Senegal withdrew from the Mali Federation on 20 August in 1960. The population is more than 13 million people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is CFA.
Welcome back. Load shedding is expected to continue well into the festive season. Eskom is still under power supply due to old infrastructure, among other things. Now, panel, businesses are apparently complaining about the lack of communication between Eskom and, of course, the public. Your views, Rulani?
It's not even about business only complaining. Even households, consumers, ordinary consumers are complaining that it looks like there's no proper communication between municipalities and Eskom. And people say when they look at the schedules on Eskom's website, it will tell you you'll be load shed for 4 hours from 10 in the morning until 1 or 2. Then you don't have electricity until 9 o'clock in the evening. So it's a bread and butter issue, if I may put it that way, that we have all been accustomed to using electricity for almost everything. There's quite a few households who have gas stoves, who have solar-powered geysers and all of those things. So it's a matter of how do we live without electricity? And it's becoming very difficult to plan your day. I mean, on Christmas Day, if you don't cook the night before, that is, there's a low chance that you will have to go to a restaurant to eat, or what would happen is that you'll have to eat cold food, which was cooked the night before. It's just a very difficult issue to deal with, because everything that we do is powered by Eskom.
Thank you so much, Rulani.
No, I mean, it's those inconveniences. It's what makes people mad. And no matter, even if Eskom was to sort out the communication mess, people would still be unhappy. They just don't want their lights off.
Yes. All right. Now, look, Eskom also gets, you've just mentioned it now, Rulani, that the fact that they are not very good communicators, what should then they do in order to enhance their communication to the people?
It's not even about communication. It's about the doing of the load shedding, when, how. They have to be able to get it right. Because you see, as people, when it comes to electricity, we want Eskom to be perfectionist. If you say you're going to load shed me from 6 until 10, let it be that. And nothing more than that. So I should be able to plan when I do my washing and when I'm going to iron it. That's all. But I was happy that there was a snap debate on Thursday in Parliament about Eskom, and the Minister of Public Enterprises was saying that only in 2018 we can be guaranteed of a stable power system in South Africa.
And that's quite worrying.
Yes, and she's also reiterated that we are we are really, as government, we're not thinking of selling Eskom to anybody.
But that's my next question, Rulani. Is it not high time we sought other ways of renewing or getting energy that is renewable energy for you?
Well, I mean, the whole Eskom thing, that's why I was saying the whole communication thing is neither here nor there for me, because the Eskom's, the dilemmas we're seeing is that it's lack of planning. As a nation, we never really focused on actually getting this thing right and planning properly for it. And with each administration that came, I mean, there were change of priorities. We are never focused on like dealing with the fundamentals of the problems that we are facing, and not only on energy, but on other issues as well. And it's time we actually look at go back. The things that need long-term planning, we need to focus on them. That is why the National Development Plan was actually hailed as something that was going to rally the nation around a whole range of issues that we need to resolve, not only not in a piecemeal way, but forever. So, because some of the excuses, are feeble. The other day, someone says, Etzinger, says, no, we couldn't get diesel. to where it matters. I mean, really, you should have a system that makes sure that you've got the diesel
and water.
Diesel is what you
Thank you so much. Let's leave it there on that topic. Let me take Lucky on the line very quickly. Lucky, a very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Your comment, please.
Okay, morning, ma'am, and Mr. Mveko and Mrs. Rosani. The issue of electricity, I think the National Development Plan, the problem can be the issue of an execution. They are there, they are good, they are so marvelous. But the issue of execution is the problem because you don't have people who've got the acumen to deliver on the mandate that the government has put on the table. And then again, I want to comment on the Deputy Ms. Jessie Duarte. The issue here, the problem that I see is issue of cadre development, deployment. We don't receive the infrastructure or whatever that it needs to be delivered on the people because there is a cadre deployment. And then ANC is winning the election all the time because they're giving people work from the communities that we live in. We are in an impoverished state here. So people are promised to work. And then it started today, EWPs or whatever, and people are there. Those are the people who vote for ANC. And then all of a sudden, they've just lost their course in terms of delivery and taking us forward. Thank you very much.
That's Lucky from Sharpeville saying, well, we need proper leaders that can execute all these proper decisions. But panel, we're out of time for the show. But what do you think or anticipate will be making news headlines this week, Rulani?
The EFF is going to court to try and for the court to review the sanctions against their suspension. And on Friday, we're celebrating the first anniversary of Madiba's death. And of course, tomorrow is World AIDS Day. On Wednesday, it's International Day of People with Disability.
16 days of
and
activism
it's still
as well.
16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. So there will be a lot of stories, and it's still not clear what's going on between NUMSA and COSATU. Every week, this press conferences happening.
So we're going to see some more developments into that. What do you think, Voya, will be making news headlines? Do you think that Ms. Nene's story is going to be actually developing this week?
Well, it's certainly going to develop because, it raises more questions than it answers them. So it is definitely going to be, at last, there is something to sort of look into in a more sort of detailed way with all its implications, but also the other attendant issues, the tenders and how we're managing them, and on the back of what the Auditor General's report last week, I think these are issues to actually look at more deeply. The Madiba thing, the 1 year anniversary, it's going to give us a time, hopefully, to reflect on who we have become. The things we have done and haven't. One hopes that all of us will use the opportunity to actually look at that and less about, the sexy little scandals and skirmishes of the Mandela family.
Thank you so much there, panel. Well, on a lighter side, journalists on the field are exposed to all the hazards of the trade, not only missiles and bombs, but skateboards too. Let's take a look at this clip.
You'd be right to be skeptical. Thousands of traditional skateboarders. Yeah, all right. Okay? Yeah, good. I'm good.
Ooh, that was quite scary. Well, thank you so much for watching Media Monitor today. Remember, your contributions and suggestions are highly valued. You can follow us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and share your views and comments on Facebook. Go to www.facebook.com/Media Monitor and like our page. Email us your thoughts about the show at mediamonitor@sabc.co.za. Thank you so much once again for watching Media Monitor. Do join us again next week. And in case you missed our live show, remember you can still catch the repeat tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. or go to our SABC YouTube link on www.youtube.com/SABC News. You have yourself a blessed Sunday. Goodbye.